Okay, everyone. So last week we looked at layer masks and we learned how to create them, and we created the layer masks for our character. And we may continue to talk a little bit about that today, just making sure everyone has good layer masks. But we are then also adding this week backgrounds and text. So at this point in week 4, we really have all of the different elements in place. And you'll have noticed probably when you're working on your character that it starts to become quite a lot about balance, doesn't it? Where you sort of look at a background, you think, oh, does that work with my character? Then I add the text, does that work with everything? And I think that that's one of the things that is the big, uh, I don't want to say challenge because it's actually probably, in some ways it is a challenge, some way it's really fun, and can be very seamless. But it is really about trying to figure out how everything fits together. And one of the main things that we're trying to do is make sure that our character, first of all, stays really prominent in the design. Sometimes when you add a background, your character can start merging with the background. We want to make sure to have that separation. Um, then, we're trying to also create a context for the character that makes sense with the concept of the character. Um, so we're going to talk all about that. So in general, I think most people at this phase probably need to make adjustments in various ways, whether it's changing the background, continuing to play with the character. We'll also talk a little bit about color today, and we're going to do that also next week. But going to sort of talk a little bit about creating a color harmony in your design, if you need to work on that a little bit more. Um, and uh, and that, yeah. So let's get started with that and see what we can work on. Okay, Russell. Okay, yeah, I think this is a good background. I think it really works well with your character. I like kind of the foggy look to it, um, and the way that it allows your character to really come forward, which is very good. Um, So I think that's a really good choice. I might suggest, I wonder if, do you need to see these elements right here, or would it be possible to maybe, sometimes what I like doing is with the backgrounds, experimenting maybe with expanding it or enlarging it a little bit to remove some of the, let's see if that works. I just kind of, I could just enlarged it a little bit. Um, and Yeah, so you might experiment with that. I'm just sort of trying to take all these kind of corner distractions out. I could probably enlarge it a little bit more, and see if you like that. Because there's already enough, I think, going on in the background to really, and really ultimately what you're trying to do is just set the stage in the most sort of streamlined way you can. Literally, in your case, literally set the stage. Um, so you might want to experiment with that. I think your character looks, I like what you did here with the arm. I think that's fantastic. It really just brings it to life, this one and this one. I think that's working really well to bring your character to life. And the text here, so I like this text down here. The reason why I like it, first of all, to me, it has that kind of edgy look that I think you're going for. But it's really pretty easy to read. And this text is so, it's got such great character, but it's a little hard to read. So if you can maybe experiment with some different text treatments, there's a website called Dafont, Dafont, and I think it's pretty much all free. So you might want to look around there. They've got so many different fonts. But you want to have something that has like a heavier footprint, as we say, like this one right here. So it's just a little easier to read. Um, so you might want to experiment with that. And then finally, with your color, you mentioned in your post you were sort of working a little bit on color. And uh, I would say that the main way to change colors, let me just pull your layer masks in here, is is through adjustment layers, which you're going to be adding to your assignment next week. I think we've got we're going to be adding at least one adjustment layer, but you can start adding them now if you like. So you can take any what I like to, so if you don't mind, I'm going to use your assignment as a little bit of a demonstration about color harmonies or color palettes in design, that everybody could maybe think about, is that in a design, you tend to your design tends to be stronger if you limit the number of colors that you have. And I think actually so, and how I typically do that is I first of all I just name the different colors that I have in a design. So in your case, you have orange, uh, I would say orange and yellow, and then hints of purple. And then you've got this sort of steely kind of gray. You've got some organic colors in here, some like browns, some reds, like a lot of warm color. I would say that your palette is really all about kind of warm colors. And then you've got hints of purple. So overall, I think you've already got a pretty good color harmony. Um, where it seems like everything, like I think this purple sort of picks up on the purple down here. The reds are all tying together, and so are the browns. So I don't, you could experiment a little bit more with it. Um, maybe reducing the number of colors you have. I don't know what I would reduce. Maybe you could make these cooler, the browns cooler, but although you have a lot of warm, or maybe you could, take the purple and maybe make it red so you match that red color. But again, overall, I do think the colors working pretty well together. Um, but that would be how you'd start changing the color is you would just start adding in adjustment layers and experimenting with those. I might say a few more words about that later with somebody whose assignment could maybe be pushed more with color. Um, okay, so that's what so I guess I would say the background, maybe reducing distractions a little bit, and then I would maybe play with your text a little bit more. One thing too is, the live here, if you don't need the live, I might consider taking it out. The reason why is I feel like I think, let's see, is it this one? There it is. I feel like in a way I want to see the feet here and it's covering the feet, or maybe you could move things around a little bit because I feel like the feet is how, the character is sitting and we want to see that part, how it's going to move. Um, okay, so that's what I'd recommend experimenting with a little bit more. Hey, Tiffany. Hold on, let me just change the setting here. Okay, okay, yeah, I like this background. So this is Garden Glitter Grace, and there's kind of like this sort of spacious, kind of cloud-like feeling behind her. In a way, she's sort of standing on the clouds, which is really interesting. I think that works really well. So yeah, I like that background. It's also very sort of subtle, so it kind of creates this very nice backdrop for her. She's really, I think, very highlighted here, and I think the shadow looks really good. And I like the changes you've made in your design. The feet look really good. It looks like, I don't know, did you do some puppet warping on the feet? If you did, it looks really good. It makes them look like their actual feet, like the way they curve and the way she sort of stands on them. Um, and overall, I think your character design looks really good. There's maybe with the head. Let's see if I can zoom in here a little bit. There's something about this edge here that feels like it wasn't quite selected, if that makes sense. Like it looks like it was sort of like maybe not selected around the edge. And then when I look at the photograph, I think it's because it's really hard to select around here because the shadow is the same, starting to become the same color as the broccoli, if that makes sense. So it kind of has this, again, this sort of feeling of being cut off and not natural. So something I noticed is that the top of the photograph, I bet you were able to select really well right here because it's this nice clean edge. So something that you could try is just maybe rotating it. We can give that a try, just kind of, so that the other side is making the bang part, the bangs, the top of the hair. And then it kind of can just sort of flow in some way. You can kind of adjust it, but it looks like it's, does that make sense? So you can sort of see more of that edge. Otherwise, I think your character, I like the arms. I think that looks really good. The mouth, if there something about sometimes again, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes having so many small features can be a little bit distracting on the character. Make it a little too busy. So maybe you could experiment with maybe keep maybe just the eyes Or, I don't know, the nose is cute too. Somehow the P, maybe it's just the P's. That looks pretty cute too. So I would just experiment with that a little bit more as well. Um, okay. Okay, so I think the text, I love what you did here with the clipping mask. I think that was a really wonderful choice. It gives it this sort of glittery quality. Something with the text. Now, this is not a typography class, so we're not going to really spend a whole lot of time talking about the ins and outs of typography. But your text, when you use the type tool, if I go in here, the type tool has you can use something called the vertical type tool, which is what you did here. And what that does is it rotates each of the letters and then kind of configures it in a line of text. But that actually can make it a little hard to read because each letter is rotated and your eye is trying to rotate it. So a better way to do that, and I'm just going to use, uh, let me just, hold on a second here. I'll just use some kind of basic text here. I'll grab whatever's available here and give it in color. It'll be easy to read. So rather than using the vertical type tool, what you're going to actually do is take just the regular type tool and rotate it. Rotate the text. You can, transform it, or I'm going to just make it 90 degrees in there. Somewhere. It's actually easier to do it with using the transform tool rather than under the edit menu. But so what that does is, if you can see that it actually will take the same space, so you can set it up exactly the same way, the same size and everything, same spacing, but just rotate it this way, and that will make it a lot easier to read. Okay, so that's what I'd do with the text. Uh, the other thing I might do is, maybe work on your color just a little bit. And just the same way I mentioned with Russell, which is to name all your colors. And in this case, I do think you could probably reduce the number of colors. So let's see, we'll start with green. I think that's one of your important colors. Maybe yellow as well, so green and yellow. Then red, perhaps. So maybe those could be your three colors. And then what I would probably do maybe with the background is maybe change the colors a little bit. Maybe you could have one more, or maybe you could make the background kind of, green and yellow. So you could take with your background and you can apply, let's go to the background here. So let's add an adjustment layer in here. And there's different areas in here to adjust color. You can go to brightness and contrast, hue and saturation, color balance. All of these kind of in a way operate the same way. Let's try hue and saturation. And what you can do here, again, I'm just working on the background color, is I can sort of selectively pick different colors in right from here. So let's say I just want the blues to be worked on. Let's actually try the reds right here, the pink in here. So let's say, so that I just want the red to change color. So now what I can do is under the hue slider, you see what I'm doing here, the background color, just the red is changing. So you can adjust it to maybe, I don't know, maybe make it a little more green, or even a little more blue. Let's see. Sometimes you have to adjust more than one, and sometimes it doesn't work so well. You have to really play with it, but you can kind of try with the red, maybe the magenta. Sometimes that looked a bit like magenta too. Kind of play around with it and see if you can change it to another color. I'm not getting very far with this, so it's not quite. Sometimes it works better than other times, but you sort of have to maybe play with it a little bit. Make sure that we clip that too. So, okay, that's what I would probably maybe work on a little bit more. Um, or in another way, maybe you want to change some of the other colors, but maybe limit it to two or three colors, dominant colors, and you'll find that that really starts pulling your character together even more than it is. Okay, I think you're doing really well here, so just keep going. blank page. Oh yeah, I like that background. Yeah, it's very this very subtle, but yet has a lot of texture and kind of context. It has that kind of grungy sort of look to it, which is really great. Um, okay, so let's see here. I'm going to just maybe start at the top. So I love like kind of the way you've arced this text. I think that looks really good. And also it looks like you've worked with, yeah, a really nice clipping mask, a photo. I think that looks really good. Inner shadow. It's really nice. Now, the one thing, I hate to say this because I think it looks really good, but you do want to make sure that you use the name from week one, even though I know that our video tutorial doesn't use that name, and I, wish they would, because when the reasoning is when a client approaches you, in this case it's Eclipse Entertainment, and they say, "Hey, we want you to design a character with this name." As a designer, you don't have any option to change the name, unless you have meetings with them and somehow you say, hey, I think, we could have a more like a different name. But in general, we need to use the name, the parameters that the client gives us. So in this case, it would be Garbage Dump Dan. So maybe somehow you can fit that in at the top by, tweaking it a little bit. Even though I do like your name, but I would keep everything the same and just change that name if you can. Um, and then so with the background, I'm wondering whether you need to have, let's, there's something about maybe this background here. Uh, I see, yes. So it looks, okay, so that's why it doesn't, it looks like it's been cut out, if that makes sense, with this angle. And I think that makes it look not like it's quite fitting in, even though I like this idea. Now, do you need that background? Can you just take your background here that you have and just enlarge it? Let's see, hold on. Oops, I need to go to here. Just something like that, like maybe that's really all you need. Oops, sorry, I'm going a little too fast here for my laptop. I don't know, what do you think? In a way, you can see the shadow a lot more. You could even play with the shadow a little more. I like this shadow, but maybe the shadow could kind of like go stretch a little further. Maybe it could go into this space over here to kind of activate that space a little bit. So you could play with that. But I think again, at this point, sometimes, um, I personally find that when I'm working on a design, I start off with a lot more than I end up with. That oftentimes it's a process of sort of taking things out. Okay, so anyhow, maybe you could move your character down a little bit so its feet could start here. So it enlarges and fills the space a little bit more. In terms of your character, I think your character is looking really good. Um, okay, so I remember noticing that there wasn't a layer mask for the mop head, and it looks like you've added a layer mask, but maybe not the original photograph behind it. And that's why it's hard to, so I'm noticing that maybe we could sort of work on this layer mask a little bit. It feels a little kind of cut off here. So I would make sure to bring back that original photograph, pop that in there, and then apply a layer mask on top of it. Now, if you have some problems with adding the layer mask, it's just not working, let me know. But you've done such a great job in the other parts of layer masks. So I think again, you always want to have that photograph, the background showing in your layer mask so that you can make adjustments. And again, I think it's just about trying to kind of clean up that top edge. Uh, finally, or not quite finally, but with your character too, something I would do too is kind of keep, it sort of feels like he's falling over, but I like the movement. I think the movement is awesome in, having your character moving, but think about how maybe you could sort of brace him up a little bit more to make him look like maybe, so might you do that? Well, just sort of think about a person. Let's see. So here, so maybe you could take like one of these legs and have that kind of like, you know, sort of pushing up this way. It's like somebody might be standing, and then maybe the head. So I think you could keep the body just like this, but maybe then the head could, rotate a little bit this way, if that makes sense. Like a person might, rotate their head, to kind of balance themselves so it becomes more like that, that curving motion that people do. Um, or anything else, if you want to move your character, you've got so many possibilities here, but um, I think your color looks really good. I don't think you really need to do very much at all with your color because what you have now is you have oranges, browns, and then the kind of yellow, kind of neutrals like the grays and the whites. And I think they look great. And so the red sort of picks up on the orange here. This brown picks up on this. Um, and it looks like there's even a little bit of green in here that picks up here on the mop head. So I think that looks really good. Um, I always have more to say I'll probably have more to say about color and design and such in coming weeks, but I think that overall, those are my major suggestions. Now back to, I just wanted to say, if you really want your guy to stand on something, I would try to find something to stand on that you can cut out a little bit more easily. If you can even find a pile of gravel, that is just like really just a photograph of, we've got a whole bunch of gravel in the front of our house because we're putting some gravel into the backyard. And so like, just like a nice pile so you don't have to cut it out. Um, okay. Yeah. So I think it could work easily with the gravel, or like this, either way, I think is going to be a good decision. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. Tracy, so your question was that you were having a hard time finding anything that wasn't royalty free. Yeah, so uh, in this particular class, I don't require you to have royalty-free images. I know other classes do, and those are good requirements. It's a good thing to learn. But in this class, I just feel like we've got so many other things that we're learning that I just want you to find good photographs. So don't worry about that. If you want to just find something from Google Images, doesn't matter to me whether it's royalty free or not. So you can just skip that instruction altogether. Okay. So yeah, so I hope that helps in your decision making. Let's see, hold on a second here. I personally like my design while busy. Yeah, so the thing with the background is the background. I think when you're working on a design, it's very easy to start. You know your design really. You know it, like what it looks like. And so when you add a background, you tend to see things in a different way than the rest of us do. So like for example, when I look at your design here, I think, oh, it's so easy to see. I can see your character. But then when I add the background, it looks like he's becoming part of the background. So no, I no longer see a character. So I would keep experimenting here. Paige, like look at Paige's background in the one we just looked at, how it had so much character, it looked kind of grungy and dirty. Maybe you can find some dirty newspaper or dirty paper or something that is, a simple background and use that, you know, for your background. Now, and again, now that you don't have to worry about your, uh, royalty free or copyright and such, you should have lots of options. Okay, so I love the text here. I think that looks really good. I also like the text treatments that you added in terms of the, let's see here, the clipping mask. I think that's awesome. Now, why do we have, I'm not sure why this is coming on when we put the background in there. You might, the outer glow could work. I don't know if you need it at this point. It depends upon your background. Um, okay, so moving on to your character. I love the shadow. I think that's going to work really well. So I would make your character a little bit bigger, even no matter what your background, like fill the space a little bit more. And I would keep experimenting with your character just a little bit more. Um, the the tubes in your background, I noticed this before that I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about them. There's something that they don't, can you see how they start looking kind of choppy? right? And then we want it to be a little like this side to be nice, this side to be the same as this side. So you might have to experiment with other photographs of paper tubes. There should be a lot on Google Images. One, and the reason probably why you're getting this choppy sort of clipping or layer mask here is because this edge here, Photoshop is having a hard time actually seeing because the background looks like the same color as the tube, and that's why you're getting that. Whereas on this side, can you see it's nice and clean? The background is much lighter, so Photoshop is really understanding that. So find some other tubes. I love that idea. I like it for your legs, so I'd keep working with that. Um, I think I would keep experimenting a little bit more with the head. There's something that still feels not quite right about this. Uh, um, I might, maybe look for a different photo. There's something a little too, maybe too warped about this, and then there's something, yeah, I think you could find a better tin can. And then if you want to puppet warp it later, you can, but try to, find a nice, crisp, good photograph for your tin can. Um, Maybe with your googly eyes, make them a little bit bigger. They're somehow they don't seem quite like they're attaching. So I think I mentioned maybe doing some different kinds of things, like maybe making it a bit bigger, having them kind of maybe, do something like maybe like lobster eyes, so that they'll have a little attachment there. Or, something else that, keep working on that head a little bit more. Okay, so those are the main things I would work on here. I think your color here without the background is working quite well. These grays and browns are look really beautiful. So I would just keep those and keep experimenting. So one thing I mentioned in my notes above this discussion board thread is try several different backgrounds and feel free to do that for the final submission. Just you can save them as JPEGs and say, hey, what do you think? Have two or three or four backgrounds, and then we can talk about which ones works the best. And for everybody, if you want to do that, feel free to do that. It's always good to have a bunch of different choices because the background is such an important part of your design. Okay, Rachel. Yeah, I love the idea of a forest scene and also blurring the background. I think that I would keep blurring here. Um, if you look at, so take a look. Yeah, I don't know if you saw these examples I had from previous classes, but you can sort of get an idea of how much you can really start like seeing the neutrality of the background. Like in this one, there's one element here, but it's off to the side and behind the character is, really empty. And for your character here, there happens to be a garden glitter grace. Notice how there's so much ambiance with the background, but yet it's very blurred and there's not a lot of detail, so the character stands really strong in the design. And in yours, you want to watch what's happening here, which is that your objects that you put your character together are becoming part of the objects in the background. You want a very distinct difference. So I would just keep blurring it here. Like for example, uh, it looks like you've got a copy here already, which is great. So you can always do like a smart filter if you want to really. I always like to, for blurring the background, save a copy. I find it easier to do it that way. But let's just go to the filter up here, and I'm going to go to the blur gallery, and I'm going to do a field blur. And how it starts off working is that it blurs the entire background. So I'm just going to kind of blur. I want the top. So naturally in a photograph, I think I explained this in one of the videos above. Naturally in photography, backgrounds blur out if you have a short depth of field. Also visually, like when you look at an object, like you can experiment with that now. When you look at an object in front of you, like your hand, you can put your hand in front of your face and you focus on it, the background starts blurring. That's natural to how we see things. It also happens to be the way a lot of photography does work as well. So you can really go crazy and it'll still look natural, like by really blurring that background out. What blurring the background out is going to do is it's going to make your text a little easier to read, and it's also going to make your character a little easier to look at. Then what you can do in the field blur, you can see that my mouse has turned to this little push pin. You can place it where you want it to be more detailed. So sometimes that's nice to do, especially because I can just go a little bit further up here maybe. Um, because in real life, wherever you're looking at, and this is true of photography, whatever you focus on is going to be more in focus. So the feet around her feet would be in more in focus. I think I'll just remove maybe that one. Okay, so that's what I would do here. If you don't want to do that, if you feel for whatever reason, that it just you don't like your photograph that way, then I would experiment with other photographs, simpler photographs, maybe close-ups of plants. So you get a little bit less, there's so much, so you get less detail. Okay, so this is, I think, going to really help our text a lot. I think your text, like nice choice of text. I like the kind of gentle, graceful curve in it. Um, let's see. So it's much easier to read already, isn't it? If you want it even easier to read, what you can do with it is, let's just grab our character menu here. What you can do is actually make your text even a little lighter, because then you'll get more contrast with the background. Um, okay, so let's move on to your character. So I would make your character bigger. She should really come up at least to maybe here because she needs to really fill this space. She's the most important thing. And then I'd keep maybe experimenting with her. Again, I think I mentioned this before that maybe the torso you could experiment with even a little bit more. It seems like you want to make sure that it's starting to read as parts of a body, and you have a human body, kind of, like where, a skirt, arms. So, maybe the torso somehow I don't know how, like you could work on it, like maybe kind of make it look more like a blouse. I always like flipping things and see how, ooh, that looks already better, just even without that. It's starting to look more like a torso, maybe a little less cluttered. So maybe take that off. It's a pretty element, but maybe it works better without it. Then you could play maybe with the movement a little bit. Maybe her head could, uh, sort of rotate to the side a little bit, just to kind of make her less sort of more engaged. I think that always, you know, makes, let's see here. Hold on. Let's get that head here. There we go. Yeah. So that always will make it appear more like it's a character, as if there's movement, like in real life. So you could experiment with that. I'm not sure why it's quite moving. What's going on? I don't know why it's doing that. Did I not move the whole thing? So, yeah, okay, I think I've gotten it back to where it was before, right? Do I? Let's go back here. Okay. Yeah, so, I would keep working on finding a slightly different flower here. It looks like the edges here that might, are a little bit, the edges in the flower, I think, are a little bit hard to find because they're so blended, you know? So maybe try to find a flower that's a little similar, maybe smooth that edge a little bit more. Um, you can do that in you can actually go right into refined mask here and go to, I like to smooth things rather than feather. You can kind of maybe try to smooth that edge a little bit and see. Let's try it on a black background. Yeah, so maybe that's a little bit better. Anyhow, it's such an important feature. I would work on that a little bit more. Um, yeah, I like the way it looks already. Uh, this is starting to read more as maybe like a belt, and this is more like a blouse, you know? Okay, so last thing's the shadows. So in outside, I think it would be really rare for you to see more than one shadow unless maybe there's a reflection from a mirror, happening, or a window or something like that. Typically, the sun is only going to cast one shadow. But, you can always be, I think, in some ways these are unreal situations. So maybe there's two light sources so that there's two shadows. I think that's okay to do. I would probably take the shadow back here off. Somehow that feels like it's getting, a little bit overwrought, like too much detail. And you can see I'm sort of pointing you towards less detail, and enlarging your character, making your character more a big part. Um, okay, so those are some of the things that I would work on here. Again, if you want to change your background, feel free to experiment. Blurring is just one solution to a photograph with a lot of detail, but you might want to look for a photograph that has less detail to begin with, and that's okay too. I think your color harmony looks really good. I don't think you really need to do much with that. So yeah, good. Yeah, so just keep experimenting. Okay, Leah. So in your character, let me just zoom in here a tiny bit more. So, yeah, I like this background. I think it's quite simple. It frames your character. I think it's a good choice. Um, and so remember, you want to have the name of the character in the design. So it's okay if you want to put your name here, but it's not really, I don't think you actually, I'd probably recommend against having a name. In design, we don't tend to put names on things, like our own names. Unlike fine art, we don't tend to sign things. So, but maybe, I might see where would be a nice space to put Rockin' Rhapsody Roy, if that's the character's name, I think it is. Maybe up here it seems like a good choice. Maybe you would just make your character a tiny bit smaller and put the text up there. Maybe up the side here, so you can play with that. Okay, so I think your character is coming along too. I think you could continue to experiment maybe a little bit more with it. Right now, think about what would this character be doing on stage? Maybe it would be leaning forward towards the mic, or maybe it would, be standing, moving, or dancing, or putting its arms up, as it sang. You can think about how people perform naturally on stage, and your character can do that. So I would experiment with that a little bit more. Um, Overall, I do like the design of your character. I think you could work a little bit more on your color here. Um, like for example, the blue here. So the blue here, it's a pretty blue, but there's nothing else in the design that matches the blue of the microphone. So what you could do here is maybe you could change this color to something else, or you could add um, blue text. But let's actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to use your design to kind of, we tried to do this earlier and it didn't quite work. So let's actually add an adjustment layer to change the color here of this blue. I think it'll work pretty well on this. So just clicking right here directly on your layer, adding an adjustment. Oops, oh, I didn't mean to add a mask. Adding an adjustment layer here. And again, there's different places you can put it in. Maybe let's do color balance and look in there. Okay. Before I do anything, I'll just clip this layer so it doesn't affect anything underneath. And now what we can do is, let's just do the whole thing, and we can just kind of experiment here by moving the colors around. So, you can kind of just do different things here. I kind of like, maybe I'm thinking maybe gray or red. And I don't know if it's going to work with the color balance, so let's move to another one. So let's just get rid of that guy here. You can see how amazing adjustment layers are. You can really just play with them. So let's go to selective color, can also be a good one, kind of exploring them all. And this is where you can really sort of experiment with the colors that exist. So for example, we can go to cyan here, which is the color that exists in here. Most of it is cyan, and we can, experiment with the color. Let's just clip that layer. So you can kind of see how I can really change the color in here. Magenta, I just play around with these sliders. Yellow, you can increase the yellow or decrease it. You can have a lot of fun with it. Um, So I'm not going to use that one either. So I'm going to go back to my old standby, which is hue and saturation. And I think what I might start by doing is just desaturating this a little bit. You see what it did? It just turned it into a gray color, kind of a grayish color that maybe matches the gray of this a little bit more. You could do that, or I could bring it back to 0. And here, let's see, we could turn it to a, a red. Let's see, where's a red? You've got a lot of red in here, so it's not wanting to go to red. Let's just go, maybe this is about as close as we can get. Orange, maybe, kind of blends in a little bit. So you get the idea, there's a lot of different ways to, to work with color. And you could also do that with your CD. You could experiment with a little bit with the color. Um, okay, and so I think that's about it. Finally, I noticed that, I think I mentioned this before, the cables here, um, there's some kind of an issue with the layer mask. So I'm wondering if there was some, let's just go to the cord here and see. I think that part of it might be just that this photograph is a little bit blurred in places, and also it's a little pixelated. You can see sort of it's kind of like a little blurred, and that can make it hard to make selections. So you might want to experiment with another cable, although I do like this photograph, but there's probably a lot of other photographs out there that might be better quality. We could experiment with trying to remake the layer mask. Sometimes if I'm having a problem with the layer mask, I actually just redo it to see if that helps, because sometimes Photoshop will, you know, um, you know, sort of, let's just see if it'll select this whole thing here. So I'm going to try to select as much as I can with the quick selection tool. Okay, and then we can apply our layer mask here and go in to the refine mask, and let's just see, we'll just use the, well, let's just use the edge detection tool here and see if this, okay, that's pretty good. So that actually cleaned it up. Let's see how it looks there. It's not bad. It's got a, can you see it's got a little bit of a halo there? And I think that's just because the edge was a little fuzzy. So it's a little better than before. Oh, there's some issue there too. So this might be, again, I might just try to find a photograph that's a little bit better quality because I think you'll find that it works a lot better that way. Okay, so that's, I think, the most important thing. Let's take a look at these mallets here too. It's always the little things like this that tend to be, so that's also, I think, a little bit, could be worked on a little bit more too. There's a little bit of um, fuzziness there, and let's just zoom in here. I think that's a fairly good image. So again, it might just be that the layer mask, let's see if I can tweak it a little bit. I'm going to turn this recording off and experiment. Okay, so yeah, so I went into Refine Mask, and what I did, let's see if I remember, is I used the edge detection tool here just a little bit, just moved it over until, this little blip in there kind of sort of receded a little bit, watching everything else, maybe to about there. And then I took the smooth tool and I kind of just softened the edge, around the kind of cotton bally white, and kind of just smoothed it. Some people like to feather instead. I kind of tend to go towards the smooth, but you can do a combination. And it's a little softer if you compare the two. It blends in a little bit more than this one. So And oftentimes what we're trying to do is just really make them blend in. Okay, so that's what I'd work on just a little bit more. I think you're definitely on the right track here. Okay, okay, yeah. Keep experimenting with your background. It's always definitely a good idea, and it is one of the things I think that is so important in your character. So feel free to, experiment. And I think this is an okay background. There's a lot of different colors going on. If you could find something, and it looks like it was photo manipulated quite a lot, unless you did that, um, if that makes sense. Let's see where your background is right here. Um, You know what I mean? Like that somebody went in and photoshopped it to add all those additional colors. I think it's a lot better to just find a non-photoshopped image and then Photoshop it yourself. That way too, you get a simpler color background. And right now, I think your background is a little, it's simple in the sense that it's a cloud scene, which is quite nice. But it's busy in the sense that it has so many clouds and so much kind of different colors and different things going on. I like the wood here. I think that's a nice touch, so that could be a good thing to add. And I like your text. I think that's a nice choice of font. Um, I might see, it's so what I would say overall is, less is more always in design. So do you need the stroke? Sometimes, sometimes you do when you have a clipping mask where parts are kind of disappearing, but I would evaluate that. Do you need that or not? In general, strokes can make text a little harder to read. But if you do keep a stroke, something to keep in mind that you can use a color from your palette to, you know, let's see here. Like you could use a green for that stroke so that it blends in. Now it's quite a light stroke. You could probably make your stroke a tiny bit bigger to make it more, oops, noticeable. Maybe just two. But you can see how that green suddenly starts tying in a little bit more to your character. That's always, I think, one of the keys is in terms of making any design look good is to match your colors. And so I just keep working on that. So I would name your colors. You've got a lot of red, which seems important, green, and then these organic colors here, like these browns, um, warm browns. And so I would just maybe stick with that, maybe take out the blue and the yellow and just stick with these particular colors. And then you've got white too, which is actually I consider white a color. Okay, so that's probably what I'd work on. I might sort of this element here. It's cute, but it's hard to see what's happening. So in a way, I would just consider maybe taking that out or waiting until week 6 and see. Keep it in your file, but then later on see if you need to add anything more because you always want to again keep that focus on the character. With the character, I would keep experimenting a little bit more. As I mentioned before, I think the arms and the bottom look great, and I like the idea of these leaves and the strawberries, but I think everything's getting a little bit kind of jumbled up in there. So I'd keep working on it. So what I would do is if I were working on this, I would start by just taking out this this element and keeping the strawberry only for the head so that we know for sure, oh, that's a head. You know what I mean? And then make it more prominent. You might want to make it a little larger or, maybe take some of these elements and move them off to the side, because I think we're just kind of experiment. Do you need these? Or would it be easier to see the head without those? Because I mean, leaves are such a difficult thing to work with. And then maybe the cap would just go fit over her head, the round cap. So you could maybe experiment with that. Um, maybe the head should be more rotated to look like, because the bottom seems almost like naturally like a chin, the way, like the shape of people's faces. So that could sort of fit into there, you know. So again, I would play with it. This is just one possible solution, and you can come up with any other, there's many other solutions. It's more just pointing to that being like a potential, a potential area for you to experiment more with, to, see if you can play with that a little bit more. Um, okay, so that's what I'd work on just a little bit more. I think you're on the right track and just a little more work. I think you'll start pulling this together. Hey, Tori, yeah, I'll definitely give you some advice, and I'm so glad you were able to submit the assignment by the deadline so I could include it in the critique. Um, okay, so I haven't had really a chance to look at this file, so I'm actually going to just start with the layer masks here, and I can already tell that you're working with layer masks. I can see them here, which is great. That's such an important step. Yeah, good. So, yeah, so you've got layer masks. Let's just zoom in a little bit here. I would say that maybe you just want to kind of clean up some of the edges of the layer masks. Um, work on them like this guy right here, the arm. It looks like, so it looks like probably what happened with this one is that you erased a little bit of the background, right? And then apply the layer mask. And what happens when you do that is that you lose uh, parts of it. So it's a really, so what I'd recommend doing is going back to week 3 and look at the video tutorial for adding a layer mask and reapply them as needed. So I would just go through and make sure that all of your layers, your, um, this one looks like it's been deleted as well a little bit, potentially. Let's just see here. I'm not sure. It's hard to say here. It's a little hard. This is a little bit of a pixelated image. If you can find a more, like a higher resolution baguette, piece of bread, I think that would be better. Can you see what I'm talking about here, where it doesn't look very clear? This is going to make it hard to make a selection, a layer mask, because Photoshop has a hard time with um, not enough pixels. So there's probably a ton of stuff on the internet to work with in terms of getting a better resolution. If you look at my group critique from, let's see, week 2, milestone 2, I talk about getting a high resolution image in Google Images. And you also want to just watch any uh, watermarks, any photos that have watermarks. The better quality your photographs are, the better your character is going to be. Okay, so but I do think your design is coming along. I would probably maybe consider removing a few elements in here that perhaps are kind of cluttering your design a little bit. Like think about when you create your character, how it's all going to fit together. Um, like so this could be your torso, right? And I'd bring back all of this. It looks like things got maybe a little bit erased here too. So I would just remake your character, from scratch, um, using the tutorial from week 3 last week, and put it together. I like the idea of the arms and legs here, but in the eyes. So, kind of just start with that. Start it simply. That's what I'd work on. Make it, fill the frame a little bit more. It's, really kind of bring it into the space. Um, I think your text has a good start here. I wouldn't worry too much about your text at this point. I would just worry about redesigning and building your layer masks here. Again, if you have problems with making layer masks, I know they're a little tricky. You can head over to um, Thinking Storm. If you go to the top of the thread up here, there's a little red help button right here. If you click on that, it'll take you into the tutorials area, and here's the first one. And you can get a tutor to work with you. And so you can just go and say, hey, I'd like you to explain how to do a layer mask. And you can bring your files with your photos in there. You just click right here, and then they can help walk you through that. Okay, so that's what I would do. And then I'll have, once you get that fixed, I'm sure we can keep working with your layer mat with your design. But I think, again, the most important thing is getting that layer mask in.